Okay, we're going to do our first example of the area of a circle. Here's our circle, all right? And okay, let's look at the formula first though. So the area of a circle, it's always going to be the same formula, and that formula is pi r squared. We have to understand that the pi and the r, remember that r, well before I talk about that, the r is radius, and radius is exactly what they gave us in the problem. Radius is the distance from the center of a circle to its outside edge, and that could be any one of those edges. I mean, it's a perfect circle, so it's going to be the same distance no matter which way you go. But anyway, so that's the radius, and that's what it is, center to the edge, and that's what this r represents, is radius. Pi, this symbol pi, it's a Greek letter, and it means, well, for us in mathematics, it's 3.14, okay? And there's cool little ratios as to how that works out, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But this is the formula, and it's an algebraic formula because there's symbols. There's these letters, one's Greek, one's normal R, that represent numbers that are either that will change, that'll be variable, like the radius of the circle will always be different depending on the example, but pi will always be a constant. It's always going to be 3.14, blah 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 blah. It's a decimal that goes on forever, literally goes on forever. And when I do the operation on the board, I'm going to use 3.14, but when I actually solve it, I'm going to be using the calculator, okay? And I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Because I was saying that it's an algebraic expression, we have to understand that pi and r are right next to each other, and each of them is a different number. So but by virtue of them being right next to each other, that means that they're multiplied. So this says pi times r squared. And remember that in order of operations, we have two operations right here. We have a multiplication and we have an exponent. Remember that the exponent in the order of operations gets done before the multiplication, always. Okay, so let's get started. So like I said, we know what pi is. It's a button on the calculator. But for here, to just show you, I'm going to use the 3.14. I'm going to go ahead and put parentheses and square it. I could actually put the squared inside. It doesn't make a difference really. So I'll go ahead and square the inside here. But I need to figure out what r is. Well, like I already told you guys, it's 4. Our radius is 4 centimeters. So I'll just put the 4 in here, like that. Bam! Okay, so I have a multiplication. Being that the pi is right next to the parentheses, that means multiplication. It means the same thing over here without the parentheses. But anyway, so like I said before, we have to do the exponent first. So 4 squared is 16. I'm going to go ahead and leave those parentheses so I can maintain that multiplication, okay, the expression of the multiplication. And that's pretty much it for me writing stuff down as far as, math goes. So from here on out, I'm going to be using the trusty calculator, okay? Okay, so here's the calculator. Now, on this calculator, pi has its own button right there. And I don't know how focused it is. I hope you guys can see that. It has its own button, and so that's what I'm going to use, pi. Boom. And it puts the little Greek letter, at least in the mode that I have it in right now, it puts the little Greek letter there. Let me just show you what happens when you hit enter. You get the 3.141592654, and it goes. It's a much bigger decimal, and because it has way more numbers in the decimal, it's going to be a more accurate calculation than just using the 3.14. Okay, and that's why I express it over here. I just write it down to write down something for pi. But when I use a calculator, and this is what I can't emphasize this enough. I've noticed this on practice tests, on official tests, from what people tell me. But at least in the books, I've noticed that the answers tend to be using the calculator. If you just use 3.14, you'll find that your answers won't be quite as accurate as you might need. So please use a calculator, learn how to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out. Okay, so like I said, it's pi times 16. 50.2654. It's a big old decimal. I'm just going to put 50.26, okay? Or 27. I'll round it up. What the heck? 50, no, I'll just write it down the same. All right, and then we know that this decimal goes on for a long ways, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Okay, so that's the answer, 50.26 centimeters squared. And remember that we have to put units squared because we're talking about area, that flat surface, right? That flat surface area. Okay, that's it. It's really not too complicated. And when it's area of a circle, really the hard thing, the big thing you got to find is radius. Because pi is always going to be 3.14, or it's always going to be a button on the calculator. And just remember to do the exponent first. And that's it. Then just plug it into the calculator and you get the area. It's really not too bad when there's this kind of problem. But I'm going to go ahead and change that, like I usually try to do for you guys. I'd like you guys to have opportunities to see different kinds of problems. All right. So now I'm changing the circle. Obviously, we're still looking for the same thing. What's the area of this circle? But this time I didn't give you radius. What did I give you? What is this thing called? What do we call the distance from one side of a circle to the other side of a circle that passes through the center? It's diameter. Now, diameter and radius are perfectly intertwined with each other. They're cousins or something. They're very related. So diameter is 2 radiuses. Or radius is half of the diameter. That's how they're related. So, in other words, if it's 10 all the way across from the middle, basically we're saying, well, it's half of that diameter. And that's going to give us the radius. So again, I'm going to go ahead and put 3.14. Put my little square in here inside the parentheses. And my radius is actually going to be from the center to the outside edge. And that's half of the diameter. Like I said, it's 5. And then the rest of it is just like we did the last one, okay? I'm just trying to show you the difference between radius and diameter. These are all concepts that you need to memorize. I can't emphasize it enough. When you're taking a test, you don't want to be looking back to that formula. You're just wasting time looking, okay, what was that formula? What was that formula? And plus, sometimes they write the formulas in ways that aren't familiar to us. It's the same. There's lots of ways to say the same thing, right? So formulas are prone to that kind of problem as well. So if you have something in your head that you've already memorized and you know how to use it, it serves you much, much better. Anyway, moving on. So like I said, order of operations, we have multiplication, pi times this number. But in this number, it has an exponent, and we have to do the exponent first. So 5 squared is 25. Okay, it's this number 5 multiplied to itself 2 times. So it's 5 and 5, 2 times multiplied, 5 times 5. And okay, this is the point where I'm going to use the trusty old calculator. All right, and try to make it to where you guys can see more or less what I'm doing. Pi, like I said, on this calculator, it has its own button, times 25. And I get 78.539, and it goes on more. I'm just going to take it out to the hundredths place, and I'm not going to round. I'm just going to write it down. Okay, so I get 78.53 and 9 and blah blah blah. But like I said, I'm doing this more for the demonstration of how to work the formula, how to use a calculator, and to focus on the difference between diameter and radius. So sometimes the problems are nice and straightforward like that, where they just give you a very simple circle and they give you one of those 2 dimensions right off the bat. Easy peasy, because we are memorizing the formula and we know the order of operations. As far as for this formula, the exponent gets done first, and then use the button on the calculator for pi. All right, now let's take a look at a different kind of problem.